shalt know the universe and the gods. And we talked about the idea how, as humans, we're always trying to figure things out. We want to know how the universe works. We want to know the meaning of life and death, and all that kind of stuff. And we talked about how, quite often, we seek those things outside of ourselves. And then we talked about the idea of how many people really take the time to understand who they are, understand what makes them tick. We talked about the idea of taking all that quest for knowledge, that quest for enlightenment, and directing that internally. If one wishes to know the macrocosm, the universe, and their place in it, we have to begin by understanding the microcosm, because as above, so below, we're just a reflection of something on a much greater scale. If we start by fully comprehending ourselves, how we work, what makes us tick, that gives us some profound insights into the universe and our place in it. This is something we discussed last week as well. Whoever does not work on themselves is always a victim of circumstances. They are like an insignificant log tossed on the stormy waters of the ocean. We talked about how really we think we're in control of our lives, but many times a lot of the things that happen to us are merely reactions. We simply react to other people. We simply react to the circumstances of life. Last Friday I was on a drive to Kitchener, and I got stuck in a traffic jam. What normally takes me about an hour took me almost 3 hours. It was a major accident with a transport truck, and that reminded me of the idea that, in the end we just simply respond to circumstances outside of our control. I was feeling anger and frustration and all these things coming up in me for an external circumstance. A transport truck went off the road, and here it was eliciting all these responses in me. So that's kind of what we're talking about here, is we like to think we're in control, but in many situations we're only under the illusion of control. We took that a step further last week, and we arrived at the really significant and profound statement of, we're not even in control over our own mind. We like to think we are, but if we've ever tried to meditate, if we've ever tried to quiet our mind, we quickly discover how difficult that is to do. We're continually assaulted by an endless stream of thoughts, images, memories that keeps us continually distracted. Consequently, we find ourselves in a perpetual dreamlike state. We find that our consciousness is asleep. And that's why when we talk about spiritual paths, we talk about an awakening. It's the awakening of the consciousness, realizing the divine spark inside of all of us. So in the end, although we think we're in control, we're really not. We are born, we have a mission, we have to go from point A to point B, but we find ourselves being regularly blown off course and steered by the waves and the winds. And that's what this quote reminds us of. The path to knowledge in esoteric studies begins by studying ourselves within, and that's basically summarizing some of the things that we talked about last week, that concept of Gnosis ipsum, know thyself. If we really want to make any progress spiritually, we have to begin by studying who we are, really what makes us tick. And we talked about this last week too. We can't learn about ourselves by reading books, attending classes, and that kind of stuff. The quest for enlightenment, that's something that has to be experienced directly. The truth, enlightenment, awakening of consciousness, revelation, however you want to describe that, that's not something that's going to arrive because of an external circumstance. It's not just a matter of finding the right book, attending the right lecture, or finding the right website. True change, true spiritual development is going to come from direct observation rather than intellect. Okay? Direct first-hand experience. That's why when we talked about Gnosis last week, we said, well, is Gnosis a religion? And the answer was no. Gnosis is not a religion. Gnosis simply means wisdom. It was the Greek word for wisdom. We then defined what is wisdom. Wisdom is knowledge obtained through experience. And that's a really exciting aspect of walking the Gnostic path, is it's a path of direct experience. To reinforce that, I used the story of Jesus and Buddha. And one of the stories that I told, remember, was they were both asked by their disciples, Master, tell us what is the truth. You show us the way to the light, kind of thing. And Jesus responded by turning and walking away, and Buddha remained silent. Both stories remind us that this is something that can't be told. This is something that can't be read. This is something that can't be shown. The awakening of consciousness, the revelation, is something that has to be experienced directly. If we want to learn about ourselves, we have to use observation rather than the intellect. And that's kind of a difficult thing for this culture because we've been trained to basically worship the intellect. Every form of education, be it public school, university, or that kind of stuff, strengthens the intellect and forgets about the other aspects of our psychology. Through our life, we develop the intellect. To call someone an intellectual is almost a compliment. But there's a whole spiritual side of ourselves that rarely gets nurtured, that rarely gets developed, and we're going to explore that today as well. True comprehension comes through direct experience. Okay, so for an example, I think I used the same one last week, for astral projection, you guys could sit here for hours listening to me talk about astral projection, describing astral projection experiences, but all that is absolutely meaningless until you experience it for yourself. So the way we approach things in Gnosis is we give you the techniques with the idea being that you can experience these things directly for yourself. So rather than have a class about astral projection where I stand here and wax philosophical about all these different astral experiences I've had and their meanings, instead we spend the time talking about techniques, tools, and practices that allow you to develop the faculty for yourself. This is one of the most important statements you could make about Gnosis. True comprehension comes through direct experience. And that was something that really resonated with me because I'd spent all kinds of money on books and lectures and attended different schools and tried to amass all this knowledge, but during the whole time I was amassing that knowledge, I was simply feeding my intellect. I wasn't actually doing anything. I wasn't sitting down and trying to meditate. I wasn't trying practices for astral projection. I just kept hoping I'd find the right book or attend the right lecture where suddenly everything would make sense. It wasn't until I started doing the techniques for myself, thank you very much, and actually started having experiences that I was then able to really learn and progress and develop spiritually. As we begin to observe ourselves, we will uncover a hidden side of ourselves. And this is something that happens through the process of self-observation, which we'll be examining today as well. By definition, the average human being has a large portion of their psychology that's hidden from them. That's the whole definition of the unconscious or the subconscious, right? So even if you go study classical psychology, they'll talk about the conscious part of your mind and they'll talk about the subconscious part of your mind. The conscious being this much and the subconscious being this massive section that you are completely unaware of what's happening. Unfortunately for us, the subconscious contains a lot of the source of the impulses, drives, emotions, thoughts, feelings, reactions, and that kind of stuff that we have. That's why if we ever go to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, they do things like ask us questions about our dreams. They show us things like ink blots, an attempt to uncover aspects of our subconscious mind. We'll talk about techniques today and over the course of the next couple of weeks that allow us to start delving into our own subconscious. When we start observing ourselves, when we start becoming, and here's the key word, conscious of our own thoughts, actions, reactions, and that kind of stuff, we uncover that there's a whole hidden side of ourselves that we're completely unaware of. We will discover with first-hand experience that we're unable to control certain aspects of our mind. For example, let's think of negative things like anger and depression, for example. These are very difficult to control. Nobody wants to be depressed, and if we've ever experienced depression ourselves, it's not a simple thing. You can't just snap out of it. You can't just tell yourself to get over it. This is a very difficult state or an emotion that takes a lot of effort to overcome. Why would somebody want to be depressed? But yet they just find themselves in a situation where they're unable to control that particular aspect. That's why when you see somebody for something like depression, they start asking you questions about dreams and experiences from your childhood in an attempt to figure out what triggered that response, what triggered that reaction, what circumstances of your life caused that particular psychological state. Emotions such as anger, lust, envy, they all seem to operate with a mind of their own. How many times have we lost our temper, as an example, and found ourselves having to apologize, having to say things like, I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me, I don't know what I was thinking, I didn't really mean it. The next question is, well, if you didn't really mean it, where did it come from? Who meant it then? How did it happen? If you don't know what came over you, well, what did come over you? Where did that reaction come from? What part of our psychology produced that anger? If it was directed at a loved one, somebody that you really care about, why would you want to say hurtful things to them? Why would you want to do hurtful actions to them? Where exactly does that come from? We have all kinds of things like that happening throughout our lives, exhibiting themselves on a day-to-day basis, but we never really stop to question where and why. What is anger exactly? Why did I exhibit that emotion? Where did it come from? What triggered it? And what kind of effects did it have on my surroundings, the people around me? These are questions that we don't ask, but these are questions that we're going to start to ask when we begin by studying ourselves. There's so many things we accept and take for granted about ourselves. And that's the strange thing about being human. We're so critical about everyone else around us. We judge and criticize everyone else around us, but very rarely do we judge and criticize ourselves. One of the most important aspects to develop spiritually is take all that effort that you would direct for judging and criticizing other people and direct that internally. Rather than questioning somebody else, what's their problem? Why are they angry? What are they overreacting like that for? Why are they losing their temper? Instead, directing that inwards when we find ourselves in a similar situation. That's the process of studying ourselves. These uncontrollable aspects of our psyche, they're often the culprits behind a lot of the difficult circumstances that we find ourselves in life. Okay, we'll just call suffering and misery all the unpleasant things in life, the difficult circumstances, those experiences we wish that we didn't have to have. Those uncontrollable aspects, things like anger, things like envy, things like depression and fear and all that kind of stuff. When we look at the difficult circumstances of our life, when we figure out what happened, we can usually see it's a result of something like that. You know, we had a breakup with a significant other and we discovered that perhaps it might have started because of anger. And that anger might have been a result of jealousy or some sort of insecurity or some sort of fear that we had that we projected onto somebody else, as an example. Through many different diverse ways, which we'll look at over the next couple of weeks, these uncontrollable aspects, they become the wind and the waves. They control and manipulate most of our lives and actions. And we've all seen a family member or loved one or a coworker go through this sort of experience. We know people who have such a short fuse that they end up complicating all kinds of aspects of their life. We know all kinds of people that do very strange things that we say things like, why can't they see what they're doing? Don't they understand the consequences of their actions? Can't they see that they're always single because? Can't they see that they're always broke and have no money because? Can't they see that they're unemployed because? That's always something visible in other people, but it's something we very rarely see in ourselves. That person with the short fuse who keeps getting angry and having relationship problems and problems at work and that kind of stuff, no, they can't see that behavior. And that's the problem. Okay? And we're all guilty to certain degrees of the same aspects, but with sometimes different emotions. Perhaps we don't overdo it with anger, but maybe fear is a problem for us. It holds us back in our life. It causes us to miss various opportunities and that kind of thing. Because of these negative energies, there is a continual search for pleasure as an escape from this misery, because we find ourselves under the influence or the pull for all this negative stuff like anger, fear, depression, envy, all that kind of stuff, that big ball of negativity. That's why we find people continually searching for pleasure as an escape from the misery. That's why as society we become so materialistic, because we look for this happiness to come somewhere else. The happiness can't come from within because we've all got all this negative stuff there. So we look for it in cars and houses and jobs and other people and friends, significant others, that kind of stuff. Some people go so far as to abuse things like alcohol and drugs and all that kind of stuff is an attempt to find that. Do you have a question?
I kind of do.
Sure.
Don't you think that to an extent sometimes people could be addicted subconsciously to those energies?
Yes.
Self-pity, anger, and such things, because in your brain chemically it will shoot such hormones that you become addicted just like a regular drug.
Yeah.
Even though you're not aware of it, you have to keep doing it.
Yeah, just like there are some people that, you say, oh, that person's, they think they have such a big ego. They think they're perfect. They think they're on top of the world. They think they're good at everything. There's the exact opposite of that. People that think that they're worthless and think that they're not worthy of anything, and they constantly dwell in that aspect as well. We'll see when we study this a bit further that, yeah, that idea that some of this negative stuff almost sustains itself. When we're angry, and we spend a lot of time being angry, we're more prone to anger. There's almost like a vicious circle that's produced there as that anger literally feeds on itself. And we're going to talk about where the source of all these things come from. So I think you're going to find that this will tie in really soon. we find ourselves constantly shifting between pleasure and pain, highs and lows. We find ourselves and the energies that we carry within our body in a very unbalanced state, because we're constantly going from, being on top of the world, being really happy and enjoying something. Next thing you know, we're over here and we're angry, we're upset or whatever. So we find ourselves like a pendulum, constantly swinging from one extreme to the other as we find ourselves transitioning from the high points to the low points. This is a very unbalanced way of living and causes all kinds of problems, not only psychologically, but with various energy systems of the body as well. That's what the Tao was about. The Oriental system of the Tao was all about finding the point of balance. If you studied the Hebraic Kabbalah, the idea of the middle pillar was all about that as well. Trying to find a point of balance. Trying to not be all the way to the one side or the other, but find a permanent center of gravity, a point of balance between those two poles. And that's why, as I mentioned earlier, that's why we find society being so materialistic. We attempt to bring pleasure through possessions, multiple relationships, people, all that kind of stuff. We seek these things externally to try to fill a void that's inside of us. That's why the whole concept of Gnosis te ipsum, know thyself, that's why that's so important. Because if we can clean up the stuff inside, then we can allow that happiness to come from within. Then we can allow that contentment, that peace to come from inside of us, from that divine spark that we all carry within. We don't require it to be something external. When we look at our psyche as a whole, we can break it down into a few major components. Our psyche can be broken down into what I'm going to call 3 main components, and we'll look at these each in detail. The first one is the essence, the second one is the ego, and the third one is the personality. So you can take your average human being and you can split down their psyche into 3 parts: the essence, the ego, and the personality. We'll talk about these in detail. So everybody sitting in this room right now can be broken down into these 3 parts: the ego, the essence, and the personality. So us, the average person walking on the street, they can be broken down into these 3 areas. Okay, so you can take your psyche, split it into 3 chunks. The first one we'll talk about is the essence. Now, interestingly enough, the essence is the consciousness. Okay? You could also call that the immortal seed of the divine within us. You could call it the consciousness, you could call it your higher self, you could call it your unrealized potential, you could call it your soul, if that's what you want to. Those are all words that really mean the same thing. We talked a little bit about this last week. Okay? We're all just a small drop pulled from a large, greater ocean. That drop of water that we carry within, that came from that great ocean which was the source of all things, that's the essence. Okay? That's the consciousness, the divine spark, the soul, for lack of a better term, which is how the Christians would refer to this. Okay? The immortal seed of the divine we all carry within us. Inside every single human being is a part of something much greater. Okay? You could call it the life force that we carry within us. It doesn't matter, it all really means the same thing. It's all just semantics, all words that mean the same thing. The interesting aspect of our consciousness is it represents our unrealized potential. Okay? It represents our higher self. It represents our divine self. Okay? It's the seed of the divine within us. It hasn't fully developed yet. And we're going to explore this concept today as well, because that's something that we really need to cultivate. It's the seed, it's the unrealized potential for who we were supposed to be and who we really could be. And the essence is something that we're born with. It's kind of like our life force. From the moment of conception, we have the development of the essence. And it's the essence that kind of sees us through the various stages of our life. It's always there, and it's something that's present in every living human being. But there's something interesting that happens with the essence. So it's something that we're born with. It's like a seed that's planted in the ground when we're born. But the essence only grows and develops during the first phase of life. The first 4 or 5 years is when the essence is growing. After that, something happens that causes the essence to stop growing and reach a point of stagnation. It doesn't continue and develop through our entire life like it should. So when we're born, it's like planting a seed in the ground. That seed starts to sprout and germinate, but then something happens to stop that seed from fully growing. Consequently, that seed never turns into a tree. If you could call the tree our realized potential, our higher self, basically being, God in man. The concept of God in man, the divine within the human, is to realize the potential of the essence, the consciousness. The awakening of the consciousness is the development of that seed, the cultivation of this higher power that we find within all of us. We're born with it, but it only starts to grow and develop during the first phase of life, the first 4 or 5 years. Okay, so think of the essence like a seed within us that starts to germinate when we're born, but without light, food, and water, the seed cannot grow beyond germination. Let's say that we were to take, remember the science experiment when you're a kid, you put the seed in a paper towel and put it somewhere and the seed started to germinate? That's our essence for the first 5 years of life. Then when you're back in public school, if you planted that seed in the ground, in some dirt, and if you watered that seed and put it in a sunny window, that seed would continue to grow. What happens though with the essence is, let's use that seed analogy again, and let's say when we put our seed in that soil, there's another seed in that soil. And the other seed that's in that soil is the seed from a weed. And as our plant starts to grow and develop, so does that weed. Now the problem is the weed grows faster than our seed. So the weed takes all the water from the soil, the weed takes all the nutrients from the soil, and because the weed grows faster, its leaves shade our little plant. Now the problem with that is we didn't know that the weed wasn't our plant. We see the weed and we think that's our plant. So every day we water our weed and we make sure it's free of bugs and we fertilize it, and that weed keeps growing and growing and growing until eventually what we've done is grown a giant weed and totally forgot about that essence. That's what happens with humanity. The weed that we grow and develop is the false self, the ego, and we'll look at that in a few minutes. Okay, if mankind is guilty of bowing down to a false idol or a golden idol, it's the idol of the self. Okay, basically the ego. So the essence is our unrealized potential. It's the divine spark we all carry within. It's like a seed planted in the ground, but that seed was planted with a parasitic weed. And that weed grows faster, takes all the water, takes all the light, takes all the nutrients from the soil. But if we give it the right conditions, it will grow and transform us. If we realize at one point, wait a second, this plant, that's not my plant, that's a weed. If we pulled that weed out of the soil and then went back to tending to our seed, it would continue to grow and develop. The growth and development of the essence representing the growth and development of the soul, leading to a spiritual transformation, leading to an awakening of the consciousness, leading to the incarnation of our higher self, or divine self, realizing our potential. Yes?
Wouldn't you say that weed is necessary though? As if if you don't see the dark side, you won't really recognize the light side?
Potentially, yeah. It's a part of being in this physical planet. Like you can't. It's always going to be there, so to speak. So it's necessary in the sense that this is something that every human being has to face. It's something that we all have to go through.
Turn on the light during the day in a bright place, would the light really matter if you didn't know the dark or darkness?
Yeah, that's an interesting argument. Yeah, you could say that.
As if one depends upon the other in order for you to grow.
They both definitely have to exist. Yeah, one can't exist without the other. They both have to exist. The interesting point in being human is we kind of straddle. We've got one foot in the light, one foot in the darkness. And it's up to us to decide which way we get to go. That's the interesting aspect of being human. When you look at the higher intelligences that are pure light, that's basically what we call angels, right? The intelligences that come from the higher dimensions. When we look at the entities or the intelligences that are pure darkness, that's what Christianity called demons. So you've got beings of light, beings of darkness. We straddle both worlds, and it's up to us to decide where we go. Okay, that's the problem with being human. We have free will. We can feed the weed, or we can feed the essence. The problem with being human is it's not always apparent which one is which. And unfortunately for many people in humanity, they have identified with the weed and they've forgotten about this side of themselves. And that's why self-observation is such an important technique, and we're going to look at that today. It's the ability to identify this aspect of ourselves. It's the ability to look at a thought or an action or an impulse and say, where's this coming from? Is this coming from my higher self, the essence? Am I about to feed and water that divine side of myself? Or is this a darker impulse? Is this coming from the other side? Am I about to feed and water that parasitic weed? That's what we're going to look at. Through the growth of the essence, we achieve inner self-realization of the being. Okay? Through developing that divine spark, that's why we called it the seed. It's the divine seed we find within. We can literally develop and grow that essence and achieve a different state of being, achieve a state of self-realization, achieve a state of awakened consciousness. Okay? That's something every single human being is capable of doing. We just have to remove that which prevents the seed from growing, which is the whole aspect of the ego, the false self. We have to work on our psychology to remove that which prevents the essence from growing, and that's the aspect of the ego, and we'll look at that in a minute. Now, the key word here is we have to work on our psychology. This isn't going to happen automatically. We've been identifying with that weed for so long that we don't even know what this is. We're so far disconnected from that divine spark, from that voice, that we forget that it's even there. And I think I used this analogy last week. Imagine yourself in a crowded room, and in this crowded room, in the corner, is a small child. That small child represents the essence. That child knows the right course of action. That child knows what to do and when to do it, how to think, how to help, our fellow man, how to help ourselves. That child knows all the answers. But the problem is, other than that child in the room, there's 100 other people. And those 100 other people are shouting louder than that child, and they're getting in the way. We can't even notice that tiny child in the corner. We've even forgotten that they're there. We're too busy noticing all these other voices clamoring for our attention. Remember last week we said the average human has between 30 to 40,000 thoughts a given day? All those different thoughts are like different people screaming for our attention. We end up identifying with the loudest person and stop and listen to what they have to say and having a conversation with them. We've forgotten all about that small child in the corner. Now, if we could shut up everybody else in the room, which is a technique we use with meditation, learn how to quiet the mind, if we could turn off every other voice, we could focus on that small child and hear what it has to say and hear what it, where we have to go in life and what we have to do and our mission and all that kind of stuff. We have to remove that which prevents the essence from growing, and that's the ego. We have to learn how to kick all those other people out of the room so it's just us and that inner child representing the essence, the divine spark, that drop of water that we carry within, pulled from that great universal ocean. The ego steals the vital energies from the essence, which trap the essence and prevent it from growing. That's that idea of the weed growing beside our seed, where the weed steals all the water, the weed steals all the nutrients from the soil, the weed and its big leaves steal the sunlight and keep our plant in the shade. That's the aspect of the ego representing the darker side of our psychology. Our essence then becomes trapped within the various egos that we carry within. Every little ego that we have, whether it be anger, envy, fear, lust, whatever you want to call it, they all have a part of our essence. They're all literally feeding off the energies of the various systems in our bodies. And we'll look at the various energy systems in a couple of weeks. So rather than feeding that essence, it never gets any food. Okay? Because we spend the whole time identifying with the various numerous egos that we have. It's like having a big angry dog in your backyard that you're terrified of and every day tries to attack you, but every day you're constantly throwing stakes out the window. That dog's just going to get bigger and nastier and that kind of thing. And there's an old Native American fable of, there's basically an Indian chief talking to a small child, and the Indian chief's talking about how that there's a white wolf representing the essence, the consciousness, and a black wolf representing the darkness. And we carry the white wolf and the black wolf inside of us, and they're constantly at war for a domination over who we are as a person. And the small child asks the native elder then, which one wins? Does the black wolf win or does the white wolf win? And the elder responds with, well, it depends which one you feed, because we all have that choice. Okay, do we want to feed the divine side of ourselves, or do we want to feed the darker aspect of ourselves? Every time we identify with anger and we surrender to that anger, then we're feeding and sustaining it. Every time we identify with fear, every time we feel that impulse, then identify it, then we're feeding that fear. And we're causing this vicious cycle where these things just keep growing and growing. When we look at things from a Gnostic perspective, when we break down our psychology, we end up talking about the fact that we can say that we're basically 97% ego and only 3% liberated consciousness. So your average human that hasn't worked on themselves, that hasn't tried to develop spiritually, is overwhelming ego and a very small percentage of liberated consciousness. We want to change the balance of that equation. This 97% represents all those thoughts, images, memories, and stuff that streams through our mind. This is what we identify with all the time. We forget all about this. This 97% represents those other 100 people in the room clamoring for our attention. This poor little 3%, that's the tiny child in the corner that we never listen to. Okay, we find the consciousness that we have trapped and caught up in all those various egos. Ideally, we want to be 100% liberated consciousness. That would be an awakened spiritual being. That's truly a master. Buddha, 100% awakened consciousness is an example. Jesus was somebody else who had 100% awakened consciousness. This is our goal that we're striving towards. Unfortunately, the average human is the other way around. We find so much ego, so much self-interest, so much worship of the false self, and we've forgotten all about this divine side of ourselves. We're so out of touch with who we really are that we've been spending our entire life making the mistake of recognizing that weed and watering that weed every day and feeding it and give it fertilizer. We've forgotten all about that tiny seed that was planted in us when our life started. So what we're looking at, these big nasty explosions, they represent the various egos. So you say this is anger, and this is fear, and this is envy, and this is lust, and this is gluttony, whatever you want to call them. They all represent a different ego. Trapped within each of those egos, we find a part of our essence, a part of our higher self. Each of these egos is literally feeding off of that energy. Every time we identify with anger, we're basically feeding that anger. The more we feed it, the stronger it gets, the more it wants to reoccur. So the more it generates thoughts and images in our mind that cause us to identify with anger. Same thing with fear. If we find ourselves experiencing fear at various points in our life, the more we identify with that fear, the stronger that impulse becomes, the more ways fear tries to trigger itself within us. The more we will be sitting somewhere and having thoughts that generate fear, or images generate fear, or memories that generate fear. That's fear's attempt to say, I want you to pay attention to me. Because when you pay attention to me, I'm able to literally feed off of that attention. I'm literally able to sustain myself. The whole goal to the awakening of consciousness is to simply eliminate each of these egos. Because as we eliminate an ego, we free up that essence. Every time we eliminate an ego from our aspect of our personality, every time we eliminate anger, we free up a collection of our essence, which then allows our spiritual side to grow stronger. So the idea of our essence being trapped within the ego, that's a principle that was illustrated in a children's story. That's the story of Aladdin and the lamp. Okay, this is actually a couple thousand years old. This tale goes back a long time. It's just popularized by Walt Disney. Now what we have here is an individual, a regular man. That represents Aladdin. Aladdin is just your standard human being. Aladdin has this brass lamp, this brass vessel. That vessel that he's carrying represents the ego. Trapped within that vessel was something very magical, this genie. And when he was able to rub this lamp and allow this genie to escape, this genie was able to transform his life and make him happy and bring him all these things and grant him wishes. This simple children's story is an analogy for the whole concept of the ego and the essence. Interestingly enough, in a lot of older esoteric schools, the idea of cleansing the personality or eliminating those psychological defects we refer to as egos, they called that process whitening of the brass or polishing of the brass, suggesting that we should be golden and shiny representing the divine spark, the higher self, but we find ourselves all tarnished and dirty, and it's necessary to polish ourselves. Well, isn't it interesting that Aladdin finds this lamp, and how does he free the genie? By polishing it. The idea being that the polishing of the psychology, the elimination of the tarnish and the rust and the dirt, allows the magical being to come forth, that being which can transform our lives. Yes?
It's like the metaphor from the alchemy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's that. We'll get into that like way down the road, but that's exactly what that is. Alchemy transform the lead into gold. We find ourselves in the state of lead and being able to transform ourselves into gold. It's the exact same thing. Exact same thing. That's like way ahead. That's like, yeah. But definitely on the right track. Good observation. That was really good. Awakening the consciousness then. What does it mean to awaken consciousness? Everybody talks about how they want the awakening of the consciousness. They can't wait to awaken and develop spiritually. But really, what does that mean? What does it mean to awaken? The awakening of the consciousness is simply eliminating the ego. Okay? Ripping that weed out of the soil. Cleansing the psychology, for lack of a better term. Turning the lead into gold, if we talk alchemical. It's fearing the essence, allowing the essence to grow. Okay? It's no longer identifying with that negative aspect of our personality, but instead identifying with the divine spark within us. Choosing to not identify with fear and depression and anger and lust and envy and gluttony and all that kind of stuff, but identifying with who we really are. Kicking all those noisy people out of the room and focusing on that small child in the corner, listening to what they have to say, allowing them to guide and direct the course of our life. Not using fear to guide and direct what we do, not using anger to guide and direct what we do, but taking hold of that ship's wheel and steering it in the right direction. No longer being a victim of circumstance. No longer allowing the wind and the waves to determine the true course of our life. And whoops. That's something that's only going to happen through conscious work. That's something that's not going to come unless we work on ourselves. The awakening of the consciousness isn't going to happen spontaneously someday. It's not like one day we're going to wake up and discover that, wow, I'm totally an awakened spiritual being. That was awesome. Must have been a really good night. Okay? That's something that we have to do to develop ourselves. That's something that comes through a slow process of working directly on our psychology. Okay? It's not an overnight thing. It's something that arises through conscious work. And that's why we talk about the whole concept of Gnosis being wisdom, and wisdom being knowledge through experience. That knowledge comes as we grow and develop that essence. Can we experience the truth, the awakening of the consciousness in this state right now? No, because of the ego. As we eliminate the egos are the ties that hold us back. The egos are like the anchors, the ball and chain that stop us from being able to go where we need to go. The second we free those weights, cut those chains, then we find ourselves being able to ascend to different levels, picking up all kinds of knowledge and experience along the way. Once the essence is free, that's when we experience states like inner beauty, perfect happiness, true love, that kind of stuff. Okay, so all these things are within the grasp of any human being. We just have to remove that which prevents them from existing. Okay, perfect happiness, that's not something we have to, strive to get. What we do have to work on is eliminating the ego, and then we find ourselves arriving at that destination. Okay, we try to, everybody wants, I want to experience true love and perfect happiness and inner peace and all this kind of stuff. But we're trying to reach it, but we don't realize we're being chained down. We don't realize we can't reach that because we're tied down. Instead, if we turn around and cut the chains, we discover that this was easy. It was right in front of us the entire time. The obstacle that prevents us from realizing that is something that we carry within, something that's inherent to our own psychology. That's why we spend a lot of time in Gnosis talking about the ego and working towards the elimination of the ego. Freeing that genie within inside us. Because once that genie is free, then it can literally grant us wishes. And if the wishes are perfect happiness and all that kind of stuff, that's what we end up getting. But that's an active process. That's not going to happen because we read a few books. That's not going to happen because we attended a lecture or went to a website or bought something or spent a bunch of money on something. That's only going to happen through conscious work. So that's the essence, the divine spark that we all carry within, but unfortunately it's something we never realize. It's something we never fully develop because we spend too much time identifying with this, the ego. It turns out that we don't possess a definitive individuality. We're a whole mess. We're a psychological multiplicity, a sum of various I's. Okay, so it's not that we have one ego, it's that we have tons of egos in our body. We rarely find ourselves as a single individual. We firmly believe we're a single individual, but we're actually a multiplicity. Our personality is constantly shifting and moving as various egos express themselves. The I's are the same thing as the egos, are the same thing as the psychological defects. In Tibet, they refer to this as the doctrine of the many I's. The idea being that every single human being carries a whole bunch of different egos inside themselves. The personality is basically defined as whatever ego is exhibiting themselves at a particular time. Within each of us exists many different people. This is a really strange thing to think about, but we've all experienced this. We've all done something and looked back on it embarrassed or ashamed or thinking, I don't know why I did that. That was really silly. That was really stupid. It could be, getting angry and lashing out at somebody, or it could just be doing something very silly. Something very irresponsible, looking back on it the next day going, oh, why did I do that? What was I thinking? Well, the problem is, the you at the time that you did the silly thing is not the same you that looks back on it and goes, I don't know why I did that. I don't know what I was thinking. The fact was, it was a different aspect of your psychology that was exhibiting itself. When we identify with anger, we get angry, and we act based on that anger. Which means maybe we lash out, or we say hurtful things, or we, throw dishes, or punch holes in walls, or whatever it is we do. When that anger is gone, it's replaced by a different ego that's now embarrassed, that's now ashamed at what it's done. Proof of this kind of concept, if you're having a hard time thinking about it, indecision. You ever change your mind? What does it mean to change your mind? Well, when you do something, there's a different ego that wants to do something different. Okay? Falling out of love, one day we've all done this, right? One day at some point in time you were like madly in love with somebody, this was the person, this is it. And if you're fortunate, maybe you've done that your entire life. But for the overwhelming majority of humanity, the person they swore love to today is not the person they'll swear love to some people next week, next month, next year, next 5 years, or whatever. Every time we change our mind, that's one ego replacing itself with another. How many times have you wanted a snack and you go, oh, I'm hungry. I'm going to get up and go to the fridge, open the fridge door, you're like, oh, there you go, chocolate cake, that's what I'm going to eat. And then something else comes in your mind and says, well, I don't know, I could really go for a bag of chips right now. Okay, maybe not the cake, maybe it's the chips. Cake, chips, cake, chips. This is an example of two opposing egos expressing themselves through your personality, basically fighting for your attention. Okay? We've all done stuff like this before. The concept of being hypocritical is another concept of the ego. When we say, oh, I would never do that, and then the next thing we know, we find ourselves doing just that. Okay? That was one ego that says, oh, no, I'd never do that. Another ego that says, screw that, I'm doing this. Okay? We find ourselves a psychological multiplicity. We can't make up our mind. When we make up our mind, we change our mind. We're hypocritical. We can't keep track of all these different thoughts. We find ourselves constantly being bombarded with 30,000 thoughts a day. We're constantly trying to figure out what we're supposed to do. That's the whole concept of the ego. The entire time that process is going on, the consciousness remains asleep. Okay? We instead identify with the various egos and let them direct the course of our life. We get angry, we identify with that anger. Now anger has got control of the car. Now anger is taking the car and steering it where it wants to go. Then anger gets bored and says, I'm out of here. Leaves the car stranded somewhere else, and we realize, where am I? How did I get here? Then another ego comes forward, and it takes the car, and it still steers the car somewhere else. That inner child is the one that should be driving the car. The consciousness should have control of the wheel, but it doesn't. It's the various egos that direct the course of our life. Yes?
Like menopause.
Well, there you go. There's an example of that kind of thing. Yeah. There's all kinds of things that trigger the different various states of our psychology, whether external but also internal stuff as well. The idea being that essence should have the steering wheel. That essence should be directing the course of our life. But instead it's not. It's various egos coming in and out, fighting for control of that car. Consequently, we find ourselves a victim of circumstance. We're just taken along for the ride. The ego of anger takes the steering wheel. It directs us where it wants to go. We find ourselves saying what it wants to say, doing what it wants to do, whether it be directing hurtful words or lashing out at someone or smashing something. And then later on, when that anger is gone, we look back at that behavior and we're shocked. We don't know why we did it. We don't know. We have to apologize. We have to say, I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know what came over me. Basically what we're saying is, I wasn't driving the car. Somebody else was, and I don't know how I ended up here. Okay? That's the kind of thing that we see when the various egos express themselves through our personality. Because of the ego, we're never the same person, which is a strange thing to say. We're constantly shifting. Our personality is very fluid. We're constantly changing and adapting as various egos come in and out. We have different moods. The whole concept of a mood is just describing a different ego. I was in a really bad mood yesterday. What that really means is I was exhibiting the following egos. I was, afraid or depressed or angry or whatever. We behave differently in different circumstances and around different people. I mean, come on, you're not the same person you are at work as you are at home. You're not the same person with your loved one that you are with your kids, and you're not the same with your kids as you are with your friends. That's what we do as humans. We're chameleons. We're constantly changing our colors to adapt to the various circumstances. The main tool that allows us to do that is the ego. So who are we really? Are we the person at work? Are we the person at home? Are we the person that we are with our loved one? Are we the person we are with our friends? Are we the person we are with our family, our parents, our kids? Well, who are we? And that's the question, is we're actually none of those things. We're something else. And that's the concept of developing the higher self, the awakening of the consciousness. Because we find ourselves constantly changing. That was the whole idea. Remember the story of the Bible about building the house on the sand versus building the house on the rock? Building the house on the sand represented trying to develop the spirituality, our spiritual aspect of ourselves, while we carry the ego. The ego is the sand. It's not a permanent foundation. It easily moves and slips and gives way, leaving us with no real foundation. While we carry the ego, we don't have a permanent center of gravity. We don't have a foundation on which to stand, because it's unstable and it's constantly moving. When we eliminate the ego, that was the analogy of building the house upon the rock. The house representing our personality. When the house is built upon the rock doesn't move. The rock doesn't give way. The rock is a really stable place from which to stand and develop and grow. The rock representing the consciousness, the essence, the sand representing the ego. We're full of contradiction, hypocrisy, and we're continually distracted. Everybody, we find that all the time. No matter, we say, well, that's, politicians are always like that. Well, we're like that to a certain extent in our own lives. We're continuously distracted. We talked about this last week. You're in this room right now. Yes, I can physically see you there, but your mind's not there. Well, it might be now because I mentioned that. But you were thinking of something else. Like 2 minutes ago, you were thinking of what you're going to do tomorrow night because it's the weekend. Or you're thinking, what time is this done? I got to get a bag of milk. Or you're thinking, geez, it's kind of warm in here. There's all these different thoughts that you're having. While you're doing that, you're not in the present moment. Interestingly enough, the present moment, the eternal instant, that's where the consciousness is. That's where that small child is. The ego is constantly trying to take us out of the moment. It's dragging us back into the past, into fantasy land, reliving memories and experiences. Or it's pulling us into the future so we can worry and plot and plan and all that kind of stuff. We're never in the present moment. That's what the ego does. It generates those thoughts and those images so we identify with them and don't stay in the present moment. Okay? Life is like a corridor. All we got to do is start this end of the corridor, the long hallway, and go to the other end. That's our goal, that's our purpose, get from point A to point B. And along that hallway, there's all these television screens. And the television screens represent the egos. All we have to do is walk in a straight line. That's the purpose of our life, get from here to here. It sounds pretty simple. You take a step and, oh, hang on, something caught my attention here. You stop, you sit down, you watch this television screen. And then you realize, no, I'm supposed to get to the end of the hallway. And you walk another couple of feet and, oh, something good on this TV. And you stop and sit down and watch that television screen. The ego continually distracts us in an attempt to keep us out of the present moment, in an attempt to prevent us from identifying with that essence, the divine spark. Because when we identify with the essence, we're feeding it and starving the ego. When we identify with those TV screens, then we feed the ego at the expense of the essence. And the ego wants to be fed. The ego wants to take control of that car. Because when the ego's in control of the car, we're feeding it. We're allowing it to sustain itself. Consequently, the ego traps our consciousness, controls our lives, and causes us to sleep profoundly. The irony of being human is right now you're saying, well, I'm not in bed, I'm not asleep. The irony of being human is right now you're asleep, but firmly believe that you're awake. Life is a continual dream. It's just full of distraction. You may have heard before the concept of all the world Maya. It's just an illusion. Everything you see before you is an illusion. It's a distraction. It doesn't exist, and it's not really here. which is a really strange concept. We'll explore that at different levels throughout the course. But yes, everything you see before you is one giant distraction. You're staring at the TV screen right now. And if you think of, this is where, if you get, really into it, this is where, if you've ever seen the Matrix movies, this is where these ideas we see being expressed over and over again, that's where this comes from. Okay, these are just different expressions of spiritual principles that have been in play and across thousands of years of civilization. This is where it gets a little bit, we're going to take a little bit of a detour that gets kind of interesting. The egos reside in the fifth dimension. Now, we talked a little bit about this last week, and we'll explore the concept of multiple dimensions a bit later on. But there's not just the three dimensions you see before you. Now, the concept of multiple dimensions is kind of something that people find a little kind of different. Think, how could there be multiple dimensions? Right now, you sitting in that chair, you're already a multidimensional being. You're already encompassing the first three dimensions, length, width, and height. And not only that, you're encompassing the fourth dimension as well, because while you sit there taking up length, width, and height, the fourth dimension of time streams through. Okay? It doesn't stop at 4 dimensions. There's different dimensions that exist above that. The fifth dimension is the dimension that exists right after time. Okay? And you've been there a lot. You go there every night. The fifth dimension, that's where you go when you dream. The experiences that you have as dreams when you're sleeping are you walking around in the fifth dimension. We'll look at this a bit later on. People that have deceased, that have passed on, can be found in the fifth dimension. Okay, the egos themselves, that's where they come from. The egos reside in the fifth dimension. Each one we have to think of, and this gets a little bit strange and kind of alarming, we have to think of each one like a separate entity. Okay, we're like a marionette, a puppet on strings, and the puppet master sits above making us dance. The puppet master is the egos from the fifth dimension controlling us down here in the first 3 dimensions. Okay, they make us dance and do what we want to do, which is the same thing as taking the car and driving it around. They enter and leave us according to the opportunity available to them, and they take their food from the various energies that we have in our body. Things like our psychic or mental energies and that kind of stuff. We'll look at a bit in a couple of weeks at the various energy systems our body has, but the egos actually sustain themselves. They're attempting to generate those thoughts and images so we identify. When we identify with anger, we let that ego of anger enter in our body and take control. Okay? It's like they're waving us down on the side of the road. We stop, open the door, and let them get in the car. Okay? The egos, they're not a part of who we are. They're not a part of that higher self. They're not really a part of who we are, but the mistake we've made is identifying with them. We think that they're us. Remember that saying, the biggest trick the devil played on humanity was convincing them they didn't really exist in the first place? That's the same thing. We all carry this darkness within, but we so firmly identify with that darkness, we've forgotten about the light. We don't even see the darkness as dark anymore. The egos, when we look at this classically, they're represented by the 7 deadly sins. Because when we talk a lot about the egos, here in all the world's various religions in different forms, but if you want to get Christian, people say, well, all the egos are mentioned in the Bible. Well, they are. They just call them sins. It's the same thing. The 7 deadly sins were seen as a living personification of those egos. So anger, envy, lust, gluttony, lazy, pride, greed, that kind of stuff. Okay? The 7 deadly sins are just a personification of the egos. Each one representing a different entity itself. Now, when we look at the 7 deadly sins, these were seen, and if you remember the story of Jesus talking to the devil, and he was saying, I am legion, legion suggesting thousands. Each of these is seen as like a captain, a head of a giant army. So anger might be the general, but underneath anger is hate and bigotry and all that kind of stuff. Discrimination would all live under there. Okay? When Jesus cast the 7 deadly sins from Mary Magdalene, remember that was one of the stories, we had Mary Magdalene that was the prostitute. When Jesus cast the 7 deadly sins from Mary Magdalene, what was really going on there is he was dissolving her ego and liberating her essence, which was the awakening of the consciousness. So he was basically freeing her higher self. Yes?
Are you saying that the egos are like demons or separate entities?
You could kind of think they're not demons per se. We'll explore that like a lot farther on, but they're a negative aspect of the psychology. They're not like a demon per se, because a demon becomes something else.
But is it if your vibration is low, you're attracting that to you?
Yeah, you can think of it as, lower vibrations, for sure. It's not like when people talk about angels and demons, it's not, just like the essence isn't really an angel, it's something much beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
The ego isn't really a demon either, but just, a demon is, when we look at ourselves dimensionally, there's dimensions that exist above us, and there's dimensions that exist below us. And if you're familiar with the Kabbalah, that's what the Tree of Life is indicating. We've got basically 9 worlds above us, representing the superior regions. We sit right here, the world of Malkut, which is the physical world, but down here is the inferior. We've got 9 heavens, right? There's a reflection of that in the 9 lower regions. As above, so below. We find ourselves directly halfway in between, the point of balance. The ancient people, they looked up into those higher dimensions and they saw all the, the love and the happiness and that kind of stuff, and they went, oh, that's awesome, that's paradise, that's where I want to be. The heavens are like that because they're a lot closer to the source. The closer you get to the light, the brighter things become. Now there's the reflection of that below us, the infernal regions, the various hells of the world's religion. When the ancient people experienced things in those dimensions, they went, there's so much suffering and pain and violence and horrible stuff, that's hell, I don't want to be there. The intelligences that reside in the higher dimensions, the beings, the entities that live there, that's what became the various angels and devas and gods and goddesses of the world's religions. The stuff that lives in the lower regions, that became the monsters and the devils and the demons of the various religions. They're just different intelligences that reside in different places. We straddle both of those right in the middle. It's our choice whether we want to go up or whether we want to go down. You've all been to hell, by the way, if you're curious about it. Ever had a nightmare? And a nightmare is you experiencing something in the lower regions. If you have a heavy meal before you eat, there's various chakras, energy centers of your body. You have positive ones and you have negative ones. It turns out there's a bunch of negative ones, what are referred to as infernal chakras, that are located in your digestive system. If you have a heavy meal and your stomach's working overtime, that extra energy can activate those negative chakras, and then when you go to sleep, you're pulled down into the lower dimensions. And you experience that as a nightmare. That's basically where you are when you're doing that, which is a strange thing to think about. When Hercules slew the 7-headed Hydra, the story of Hercules, one of the things you have to do is the Hydra came out in big snake, 7 heads, and Hercules kept hacking the heads off. Do you remember what happened every time he cut a head off? One grew back. That shows you the difficulty eliminating the ego and how just, sneaky the ego is. Every time you cut one off, another one appears. Hercules was the solar hero. Hercules is basically the Jesus figure. Okay, Jesus was a solar hero. Hercules was a solar hero. When you read the tasks of Hercules, the tasks of Hercules are all about the awakening of the consciousness. There's last Christmas, I think it was last Christmas, that was one of the lectures that I did for Christmas, was talking about the trials of Hercules. The concept of Jesus being born in a manger, the animals within it represent the egos. Okay, the idea of Jesus, the divine spark, is born in all of us into a manger, a place full of animals, and it's kind of dirty. But we can clean that manger. We can, eliminate all those animals and allow that divine spark to grow and develop within us. Each sin is seen as the head of a legion of many more. So the example I used earlier, anger would be like the boss, but found under anger would be hate, prejudice, racism, discrimination, violence, murder, all that kind of stuff grouped into that. Okay, so the 7 deadly sins were seen as the big guys in the army. Each one had all kinds of stuff beneath it. Gluttony is not just overeating. We also find gluttonies, when we look at it, addictions fall under gluttony. So people that are, alcoholic or have a trouble with various, legal or non-legal drugs, that would fit under gluttony as an example. People that take an excess of things. When we find, one of the issues that we see when we examine the ego is each ego fights for supremacy and wants to be in control. That's why we find our personality such a dynamic and shifting thing. We're in that. Let's take the analogy of that room. Remember we said there's 100 people in the room and a small child in the corner? Let's say it's not a room, it's a car. There's 100 people in the car all fighting for the steering wheel. What kind of course do you think that car takes? Just drives all over the place. Kind of like our thought process. Kind of like the thousands of thoughts and images that fly through our mind each day. Each thought and image is directed from a particular ego in an attempt to get us to identify with it. Something happens and we react. All those reactions are simply various egos. Somebody pushes our button, which what really means is somebody does something which causes anger to manifest within us. So somebody pushes our buttons and we lose our temper. That's anger, basically taking control of the car and taking it where it wants to go. Our egos manifest through the personality triggered by internal and external factors. They're triggered by things like, people around us and our objects. We were joking earlier about internal things like hormones and menopause and all that kind of stuff. There's all kinds of different factors that trigger the various egos. Most of the things that we experience in life, the thoughts, the actions, and the emotions are simply reactions. And the reactions we've been enforcing our entire life. A plus B equals C. When this happens, then I am sad. When this happens, then I am angry. When this happens, I am happy. That's what we do with all different aspects of our lives. A lot of our emotions and our thoughts follow a pattern like that. And that pattern is something that has been developed over the various course of our lives. The type of parents we had, the area that we grew up in, the experiences we had, they all molded those sets of equations of A plus B equals C. And we carry hundreds of different equations within us where the equals part is just a different ego. When this happens, if I insult you, you feel angry. If I compliment you, you feel happy. You get cut off in traffic, you get angry. You find some money on the ground, you get happy. Okay, that's what our emotions are. For many cases, it's just simply a reaction to a circumstance. A circumstance could be a person saying or doing something, or it could be something like, an inanimate object, a traffic jam, as an example. Traffic jam, I am late, therefore I am angry. That's the equation. When I was in that traffic jam Friday, I was able to experience that. Like, wait a second, I'm getting short-tempered, I'm getting angry, I'm getting frustrated. Why? Because it's a traffic jam. Because that's the way I've reacted my entire life. Because that's the way that I'm programmed through previous experiences and behavior and education and upbringing, society. That's the way I'm supposed to react. We change our mind because one ego is replaced by another. We react in situations and then regret what we have done when one ego is replaced by another one. For example, imagine quitting your job because of anger, getting into a fight and doing the whole, take this job and shove it, and you're feeling, happy, and I finally, told that person where to go, and I finally stood up for myself, and then you're going home, and then it hits, how am I going to pay the rent? Oh, that was a really good job, and it had a lot of benefits. What did I do that? I can't believe I did that. Same thing with reacting in anger and breaking up with someone. Fine, this relationship's over, I don't want to see you anymore. And then a couple days or a couple weeks go by and we find ourselves missing that person. Why did I do that? I probably shouldn't have reacted like that. That's all examples of the different egos, the various fluid aspects of our personality. We fall in love with someone and then the relationship dissolves, or we find situations of infidelity because the egos change. The ego that swears love for someone today is not the same ego that might be there next month, next year, or a couple of years from now. So all kinds of different aspects of our life are affected by various egos. Okay, the course of our life, imagine that car just flying all over the place, different egos fighting for the steering wheel. The whole time there's that divine spark, the one that should be driving the car, can't even get near the steering wheel, can't even take us in the right direction. Eliminating the ego, that was the mystical death. That was the meaning to die within ourselves. And that's what the resurrection myth was all about. When Jesus died and was reborn, what died? It was the ego, the false personality. What was born? The divine within inside of him. That's why after his resurrection, where did he go? He ascended. He went up to heaven. What does that mean? That means that the divine essence within him developed and he was able to go back to the source. Remembering the resurrection myth, that's not, the resurrection mythos is not unique to Jesus. There's a lot of the solar heroes that have that same myth. Osiris was another example. Osiris died and was brought back to life. It's representing the same story, the death and the rebirth. What is it that's reborn? The spiritual side of ourselves. What is it that dies? The false personality, the ego. Okay, so when we look at the myth of the solar hero, it's told over and over again. One of the prominent aspects of that myth is to die and reborn. Sometimes it's told as going down to hell and coming back. That was Hercules. He went down to hell and fought some monsters and slew them all and came back up. The monsters he was fighting, the dragons, the demons that he had to fight and kill, they were the various egos. Everyone contains egos, even the virtuous, saintly, kind-hearted. And that's the problem, is when you look at this, I'm not going to call it a shock, but it's kind of like a little bit of a shock when you reflect on some of these things, to think that you have, these entities coming in on our personality, controlling my moods and my thoughts. He's probably talking about somebody else. Maybe he's talking about everybody else in the room, but probably not me. Because I'm good. I'm perfect. You guys all got problems, I'm sure, but not me. I'm perfect. We all have a tendency to do that, right? You ever heard this? Under the right circumstances, hidden dark egos appear. Ever heard the expression, the road to hell is paved with good intentions? That's why. Okay? And this is a kind of a not so pleasant example, but look at the state that the church is in, with priests doing things with children. You look at, obviously a priest, someone devoted themselves to God and religion. How could you get any more virtuous, saintly, and kind-hearted? But some of those people, you give them the right circumstances, you uncover that there's a dark aspect of everybody. Okay, everybody has the ability to carry all kinds of darkness within themselves. Sometimes you don't even know it's there until it's given the opportunity to manifest itself. And that's one of the difficult things of being human, and that's one of the difficult aspects of examining our own psychology. That's why, remember, we talked a little bit about this last week, to really develop spiritually, we have to be prepared to hold up that mirror and really look at the reflection that comes back. And not a lot of people want to do that. A lot of people just want to keep believing that they're perfect and that they're, great, wonderful, beautiful people. That's the worship of the self. That's the golden idol that we all worship. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai and saw the people worshiping the golden idol was the idol of the self. We put ourselves up on a pedestal, and that's what we worship every day. We excuse behaviors in ourselves that we don't tolerate for a second from other people. Okay, we spend so much time criticizing and judging and studying other people, and then we never direct that at ourselves. We never really get to know who we really are. And that's where the technique of self-observation comes in. Self-observation is all about holding up that mirror and really studying what's there. We have to struggle against the ego. That was the battle. We always see the solar hero fighting the monster, the dragon, the demon. Even Jesus was tempted by the devil himself, who said, all this before you could be yours if you just, say that you'll follow me. That was an example of the light versus the darkness. That's the battle that we find raging in all corners of the universe. And that's the fight that we have to engage within ourselves. It is unnecessary for us to continue to live this way. It's really a choice that we can make, and it sounds like a really strange thing, but we can choose to fight against the ego. We can choose to develop that divine spark within us. Okay, this is something that every human being has a potential to do, because every human being carries that divine spark. We can choose to climb that ladder and ascend back to that source. Observation is the first step in comprehension and elimination. We think of this as a 3-step process. Observe it, understand it, eliminate it. The first step we're going to deal with for the next few weeks is just learning to observe it. Okay? If we have a problem with anger and we want to eliminate anger, if we find, okay, I have a short fuse and I really need to work on that, the first step is observe that anger. What triggers it? Why does it happen? When it happens, what do you do? What are the thoughts that you have? What are the actions? How are you affecting the people around you? Once you've observed anger, that will lead to the next stage, which is comprehension. Really understanding everything about that emotion, that particular ego. Once you fully understand the ego, how it works, what causes it, where it comes from, the different formulas that allow it to happen, once you understand anger is just A plus B, once you understand that equation, then the third stage is eliminate it, permanently removing it from your psychology. Okay, so observation, comprehension, and elimination. That's why the Greeks said, Gnosis ipsum. Know thyself, because if you don't know what's going on in there, then you don't understand anything about yourself. If you don't understand anything, then you're not going to be able to improve it. That's why above all the temples, the first thing you saw was know thyself. And that's what self-observation is. It's a technique that we use, and we'll be talking about this over the course of the next few weeks, to really get to learn who we are. We have to observe ourselves and try to identify and get to know the different eyes inside us. Because remember, the eyes, by definition, make up the subconscious. You don't know what's there. That's why they call it a subconscious. It's like just like the moon has a dark side that we never see, your psychology has a dark side that you never see. Okay, we need to take the light of consciousness and illuminate that dark side. We have to shine a light into all the dark corners and see what's there. Imagine a big dark cave with a small candle. That small candle represents the consciousness, and it only illuminates a very tiny area. And because of that, there's all kinds of stuff that can hide in the darkness. We want to develop that consciousness. We want to turn that candle into a huge spotlight that shines a light everywhere, leaving nowhere for the darkness to hide. We have to discover what eyes control us the most. So what particular egos do we find ourselves under the influence of most? Remembering that we can always see that in other people, but we can't necessarily see it in ourselves. So we can look at somebody else who has a short temper and is always causing problems with their anger, but there's a good chance that person doesn't know they have a problem with anger. Just like if we know somebody that has a problem with alcohol and is causing all kinds of problems in their life and the lives of people around them with alcohol, they're usually not aware of that. They're in denial and they don't want to acknowledge the fact that they have a problem with that. Okay? We have to ask ourselves, what particular eyes control us the most? What egos do we find ourselves under the influence of? What eyes appear regularly? What triggers and causes those egos, and what problems do they cause us? How do they steer and direct the course of our life? Okay, so when you look back over a particular day, what emotions were there? What thoughts were there? What triggered them? Where did they come from? What was the result of those thoughts or those emotions? The way to think of this is we have to be alert like a sentry in a time of war. A sentry is the guard, and he's on lookout, and he's waiting for the enemy to appear. That's what we have to be like. We have to be waiting for the manifestation of a particular emotion or a particular thought. So if we say, okay, I really want to get to know anger, or get to know envy, or get to know whatever it is. If I say, okay, I really want to get to know anger, I'm going to try to be conscious of the different manifestations of anger that occur during the day. I'm going to be prepared and waiting for anger to happen. And let's say I work with somebody who's really annoying and they drive me crazy. And the second I hear their voice coming around the corner, I'm like, wait a minute. There's anger. I felt that. Okay, I know what this is caused by, but now why am I reacting in anger? What is this anger trying to do? Is this anger trying to make me say something to this person or put them down or gossip about them, or what's the result of that anger? We have to observe ourselves in action from instant to instant, moment to moment. That's the goal, okay? That's a state of continuous consciousness. That's going to take some practice, to be constantly aware of our thoughts, our actions, and that kind of thing. That's something that we're going to develop over time. Right now, we just have to look at what eyes cause the most problems in our lives, and those are the ones that we're going to start to self-observe. The social interaction of life is the perfect mirror in which we're able to discover ourselves. That's why one of the key components of Gnosis is not about hiding in a cave and living by ourselves and that kind of stuff. That's why Gnosis says we have to accept and embrace life. Every situation, every circumstance we find ourselves in is an opportunity to perfect ourselves. Everything that happens to us in our life is an opportunity to observe, comprehend, and eliminate an ego. There's a famous story about Master Samael. There was, in the town that he lived, there was this really annoying person. Everybody hated this person, and every morning he'd get up and go have basically a cup of tea with him. And people would say, why do you keep going to that guy's house? He's so annoying. And he'd say, yeah, I know. It's perfect. He brings out all these different egos in me. And as they come out, I can see them, I can study them, and I can eliminate them. That's why if I had a problem with anger and I said, forget it, I'm going to live in a cave, and I lived in a cave for 30 years, and I think, wow, for 30 years, I haven't been angry. And then leaving my cave, somebody cuts me off with their car, and I'm immediately angry again. Okay, I didn't really eliminate that anger. There was nothing to bring it out. I was just able to suppress it, but it was always still there. In social interaction, those hidden defects come out spontaneously, and if we're in a state of alertness, if we're paying attention to our psychology, we can see them. So our friend comes over in a new car, If we're paying attention, we can, oh, hey, wait a sec, that's jealousy I'm feeling right now. Well, why should I feel like this? This is my friend, I'm supposed to be happy for them. They've done something good, like, why am I feeling this? You know, that annoying person at work, or that friend or a family member that drives us crazy. If we're paying attention, when we feel those impulses, we can catch them. And we can study them, and we can get to learn about them.
My question.
Yes?
So one who is overcome, let's say anger, for example, need not attract into their life circumstances that would cause it to arise.
Yeah,
in
basically.
essence, right?
Yeah.
So we attract into our life experience circumstances that elicit the ego that we're trying to overcome. Is that correct?
Not that you would go out and seek them. So I'm not saying if I want to eliminate anger, I'm going to go start some fights. Because that's like a negative aspect. But once we've eliminated that aspect, then it doesn't exist in us.
It tends not to pop up in our life anymore.
Yes. Yeah, and all the different situations and circumstances that revolve around that don't exist either. Absolutely.
Okay.
We have to become conscious of our own thoughts, feelings, and the effects that other people produce in us. And that seems such a counterintuitive thing to say. Of course I'm always aware of my own thoughts and feelings. Well, really? Because if we were all aware of our own thoughts and feelings, we'd never be angry, we'd never be depressed, we'd never be sad, we'd never say anything we didn't do, we'd never change our mind. But the fact is we still do anyway. We have to start looking at it a different way. We have to start observing those things. And that leads us to the last thing we'll talk about briefly, and that's the personality. The personality is interesting because the personality lives in its own time and doesn't reincarnate. What we're going to look at in a couple classes is the essence is immortal. It comes back again and again and again. We've all had this, maybe come as a shock to you or maybe not. You've had many lifetimes before. This isn't your only lifetime. You've had a bunch of them. And we'll look at techniques later on that we can use to get memories of past lives, to have experiences where we directly remember being in other times with other people and that kind of stuff. The personality, though, is unique. The essence comes back again and again. It's like that life force is recycled. The ego comes back again and again. Because the ego and the essence, they come from above the fourth dimension. The fourth dimension is time. Once things reside outside of time, they're no longer bound by time. Okay? The personality we have right now lives in its own time and doesn't come back. The personality is a product of the time that it's in. After death, the personality goes to the grave. When people see ghosts, they're usually seeing the personality of the deceased, the energy that made up the personality of the deceased. That's why when you see ghosts, they're often wearing the same clothes or doing the same things or in the same locations that people were habituated to in their lives. What you're seeing is actually the personality. The personality slowly decays over a long process. Now, interestingly enough, the personality itself, it's formed during the first 7 years of life. So who you are today, right now, the personality was formed during the first 7 years of life. The personality is the armor that you build in response to your external environment. Yes?
So, you don't agree that it's like throughout different lives, your personality, like you learn and you change and you evolve? It's the essence that's doing that and not the personality?
Yeah, the
so
essence
you make a
is...
mistake and you keep learning and changing as a person.
It's
That
the
has nothing to
essence
do-
that's growing and developing. It's not the personality.
So the essence is creating different personalities in.
The personality is the car. The essence or the egos can be the driver. A personality represents a given balance of egos versus essences. Okay, that's like the personality is like the shell. It's like the clothes that you put on, and those clothes would change depending on the mood that you're in. Okay, but what's inside the clothes always stays the same. That's the essence. An idea through successive lifetime, that essence is supposed to be growing and developing and ascending, climbing higher and higher on that ladder until it reaches the source. But unfortunately, and we'll look at this much later on, for many people, that isn't an upwards process. It's just a circle they get stuck in. That essence doesn't grow and develop. They keep going and doing the same mistakes over and over and over again because they carry the same egos.
So the essence would be like where it holds your Akashic files or like your lives. And then as you learn
Yes.
or you don't learn, it'll build your next personality?
More or less, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, when people remember their past life, that's a component of the essence you're dealing with. That's the divine spark that you're working with. That's where all those memories are stored. The personality is a temporary thing. And this is something you can kind of experience for yourself. Everything like the type of family you had, the upbringing, where you were, the experiences, where you went to school, these unique experiences that occurred during childhood, they mold the personality. And you can think of your own childhood experiences that made who you are. Various things that happened to you. That's why if you go to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, they'll say, tell me about your childhood. Because they know that some of the problems and obstacles and blockages that you have right now probably started back then. Because they're aspects of your personality.
And
Yes?
so all those are consequences of are karmic.
Yeah, that's the next thing, and we'll get into that briefly, but we'll do a whole class on that. Yes, and that's the next question that kind of answers what you guys are both talking about. Yes, there's a karmic element to this as well, because the type of family, the type of environment, and things that happen to you are a result of the actions of the previous life. So yes, these things all are karmic, and we'll look at that when we look at the whole concept of return and recurrence, which is basically examining the various laws of reincarnation, and that's really bound and intimately related with the concept of karma and dharma. We're going to get into that within a couple of weeks. That's kind of a fascinating thing to look at as well. And we see this, when somebody does something horrible, with a criminal, it's always like, oh, well, his parents beat him, or something bad happened to him, and there is a certain element of truth to that. We are not born with a personality. It's something that's created in response to our environment. So every life that we live, we have a different personality. Okay? But we always carry that same animating principle, that same divine spark, and until we eliminate them, we're always connected to the same egos. So consequently, from lifetime to lifetime, we can find ourselves making the same mistakes over and over again. Instead of climbing that ladder up to the source, we find ourselves just stuck in a loop at the bottom, just spinning or treading water, never actually going anywhere. And as I mentioned earlier, think back to your own childhood and how many events occurred that defined your personality to this day. The personality is simply a vehicle of action that can be driven by the ego or the essence. The personality is the car. The question is, who's driving it? The driver can either be one of the various egos, or the driver can be the essence. Yes?
So in a past life, I was, let's pretend, a very, very angry person, and I killed a bunch of people. And then in another life, I was a very angry person and hurt a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And then in this life, I'm a very angry person and I keep killing people.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be kind of a trait of my personality that goes along and doesn't
Well,
die?
the way karma works, though, and we'll look at this a bit later on, if in a past life you're a very angry person that killed a bunch of people, odds are in this life you'd be a victim of that. So you instead would be, you'd be on the receiving end of that, and that's the universe saying that's the energy you project out into the universe. The universe is like a mirror, that's what you project out, now that's what's coming back in an attempt to teach you a lesson. Hurting people is bad, killing people is bad. See how much pain and suffering this caused? Naughty, naughty, slap, slap, don't do it again. The problem is, the ego doesn't care. It keeps doing it over and over again. And
But
that's,
repetition in personality throughout lives.
sorry?
But repetition, like having similar personalities, that wouldn't really happen, I guess.
There might be some, because in the end the personality is a vehicle of action. The personality is basically inside, because, and we'll see this when we look at return and recurrence, the law of return and recurrence, because oftentimes we're bound to the same egos, what you're describing there is basically true as well. That our personality is going to be quite similar. If we have a problem with anger, because we spend all that time feeding the ego of anger, that's going to be a really big ego, and every time we come back, that ego's right there with us. So anger would be a part of our personality. But if, doing bad things, karma often steps in and makes us be on the receiving end of that, in an attempt to correct that behavior, in an attempt to allow us to observe that ego and to understand it. That's why everything that happens to us in life, especially the bad things, is an opportunity to grow and develop spiritually. Okay? We should never, and that's we'll look at this, when we get all talking about aspects of, reaping what we sow and that kind of stuff. We should never protest against the things that happen to us because it's just a reflection of stuff we've put out into the universe. Instead, we should use it as an opportunity to study what that's related to. What part of that do I carry within myself? How could I have caused this before? And how can I observe it, comprehend it, and then work towards eliminating it? Because, as we'll see later on, to eliminate the ego is to eliminate the karma that's attached to it as well. Yes?
Not to get into dreams and all that, but lately I've been having a lot of dreams healing, and I think it's because of the past, my past.
It could be.
And then I'm so related into the military and all that. Could that be what it's like the karma and all that too, or
Possibly.
like my past life?
Yeah, possibly. Who knows? A lot of aspects of our dreams as well can be from past lives.
I don't know, because lately it's been like elements and like I've been healing family members. It's pretty intense.
Yeah, who knows? You could have been.
And then like lately too, it's like between my dreams it's like healing, then the next dream's like military, and then back to healing, the military, and then back to healing.
Yeah, who knows? But that's one of the things of working with self-observation is analyzing that. And we'll see later on, a couple classes ahead as well, that self-observation is not just stuff you do during the day when you're awake, but it's your dreams as well. Looking into your dreams to ask that exact question: what does this mean? The healing thing. How is it? Am I seeing reflections of this during the day? And trying to sort through all that stuff. In regular humanity, the personality is driven by the many egos who are all fighting for control of the car. The personality is the car. Who's the driver? You're either going to have the egos or the essence driving that particular car. The personality is just a puppet that's controlled by the various egos. The personality is the puppet, just the marionette. The puppet masters are the egos, the ones controlling the strings. We want to reach up, cut the strings off, so we can be a legit. And it's an interesting story too. The story of Pinocchio is fascinating because it's all about this. It's an old tale that goes back a while, and Pinocchio wanted to be a real boy representing the higher self, the awakening of the essence. He was a puppet on strings. We'll examine the Pinocchio in a couple of weeks because it's fascinating. There's all kinds of alchemical symbolism and stuff in there. The sum of all egos forms the personality. So all the different clothes that you put on represent all your different egos. That forms the sum total of your personality. As a result, the personality is fluid and has many different depths as we take off various clothes and put new ones on. Just like we change our clothes every day and appear to be different on the outside, psychologically we change our clothes regularly as well. The clothes representing the different egos. So you have some homework. Try to examine the mistakes and difficult experiences of your past. I don't mean relive them and relive the same emotions and difficult experiences, but just try to understand the things that happened and try to identify the egos that caused them. Now, it might not be the ego in you that caused it. It might be the ego in somebody else. Let's say at one point you were a victim of violence. Well, I'm not saying what did I do to cause this violence, but what ego was responsible for that situation? It might be anger in somebody else. Okay, well, is that anger, is that situation developed any anger within you, as an example? So just to give it a little bit of thought, just to try to, think a little bit about this and confirm some of these things for yourself. Because remember, the whole aspect of Gnosis is you don't have to believe any of this stuff. The idea being with Gnosis is you'll think about it, you'll arrive at your own conclusions. So you need to experience the ego directly in yourself, and then go, okay, I know what the ego is. Not because I said, but because you experienced it. You experienced the anger or the fear at some point during the next couple of weeks and going, hey, there's something in me where is this coming from? Why am I reacting like this? If you have a fear of spiders as an example, or snakes or something like that, why? They're not going to hurt you. Why would you react with that response? What purpose does that response serve? Any more questions?
Okay, last week we just worked on a basic aspect of meditation, which was concentration. Okay, remembering that when we're trying to do a meditation, the key is to stay in the present moment, to stay in that eternal instant, and to not identify with the egos. We now understand that the thoughts and images that are going to appear in our mind, they're the various egos trying to get our attention. We should see those thoughts just like cars on the street. They drive by, we don't identify with them. Every time we identify with a thought, that's like waving a car down, getting in it, and letting it take us for a ride. Okay, we can't stop the thoughts at this point yet, but we don't have to identify with them. They're just like clouds in the sky, they simply pass us by. We should see ourselves at the center of a wheel with everything else revolving around us. We're separate from it. We don't have to identify. Okay? But it's kind of like a tug of war. We know at some point we're going to identify. And we're going to get caught away with a thought or a memory or thinking about the weekend or something. That's okay. Just bring your attention right back to the present moment. It's like a constant tug of war between the past, the present, and the future while we're trying to stay in the present. The more you keep anchoring your concentration, your attention back to the present, the more likely you are to stay there. Okay? And the other key to meditation that we developed a bit last week was the concept of relaxation. Concentration and relaxation are key to
reaching the deeper states of consciousness that we need to achieve if we want to do things like remember past lives, astrally project, and that kind of stuff. Okay, so we're going to start by finding a comfortable position we can maintain for the next 15 minutes. Keeping our back nice and straight, because one of the key things we learned last week was the proper use of breathing. So we're going to start by working with the complete breath, which we learned last week. A slow, deep inhalation through the nose until our lungs are completely full. We couldn't squeeze another drop of air in. And then a slow, gentle exhalation, also through the nose, until our lungs are completely empty, pushing our diaphragm all the way in to eliminate all the air. For the next few minutes, we're going to direct our attention, our concentration to our breathing as we practice the complete breath. Relieving all our thoughts, our worries, the distractions of life. We're leaving them in the door upstairs. We'll pick them up on the way out, but for right now, they're just an illusion, a distraction. They don't really exist. All that exists right now is our breathing. The only thing that matters is our breath. The only thing that's real is our breath. Fighting to stay in the present moment, the eternal instant, not identifying with the thoughts and images on the screen of our mind, the simple products of the ego. When we stay in the present moment, when we don't identify with the ego, we feed and nourish the essence. It's like a workout or exercise for our consciousness. The more we do it, the more it can develop and grow. And as we keep our breathing slow, deep, and rhythmic, we're now going to focus on relaxing the body, starting at our toes, relaxing all the muscles in our toes, feeling the muscles go loose and slack, bringing that sense of relaxation into our feet, relaxing all the muscles of our feet, feeling the muscles go loose and slack, bringing that sense of relaxation into our ankles, feeling our ankles relaxing, keeping our breathing slow and deep, bring that sense of relaxation into our calf muscles, feeling the muscles of our calves relaxing, feeling the stress, the tension leaving them, bringing that sense of relaxation into our knees, relaxing the muscles of our knees, feeling any pain, discomfort, or tension melting away as the muscles relax. Bringing that sense of relaxation into our thighs, relaxing our thigh muscles. Feel them going loose and slack as the tension and stress leaves them. Don't imagine, don't visualize, but actually feel the muscles relaxing. Now that our legs are completely relaxed, we can bring that sense of relaxation up into our hips. Feeling the muscles of our hips relax. Bringing that sense of relaxation now into our lower back. We carry a lot of stress and tension with our lower back. So with our next exhalation, when we breathe out, we imagine breathing that sense of relaxation around to the muscles of our stomach and abdomen. Feeling those muscles relax and go slack. Feeling the stress and tension leaving them. We can now continue bringing that relaxation up into our back and our shoulders and our chest. Feeling the muscles relax. Feeling our shoulders drop down slightly as the stress and tension leaves them. Bringing that sense of relaxation down into our arms. Feeling the muscles of our biceps and triceps relax. Feeling our elbows relaxing. Relaxing our forearms. Our wrists. Our hands. And finally our fingers. Feeling our entire arms completely relaxed. There's no stress, there's no tension, there's no discomfort. We can now bring that sense of relaxation up into our neck, relaxing the muscles of our neck, feeling the muscles go slack and loose as the tension leaves them. Relaxing our jaw muscles, feeling our jaw drop down slightly as the stress and the tension leaves. Relaxing now the muscles of the face and the eyes. Bringing that sense of relaxation to our forehead. Finally, all the way to the top of our head. Our entire body is completely relaxed. The key to maintaining this sense of relaxation is to not identify with any thoughts. Stress and tension are caused by things like memories and worries. Right now in this room, all that exists is peace and relaxation. Things like stress, tension, upset, they may belong to our past, they may lie ahead in our future, but right now, in the eternal instant, these things do not exist. All that exists is peace and relaxation. The only thing that's real is our breathing. The only thing that exists and that matters is our breath. I'm going to spend the next few minutes trying to concentrate solely on our breathing without being distracted. Trying not to move, fidget, or shift position, but to hold this state of relaxation and concentration on our breathing. If we find ourselves identifying with another thought, that's okay. Just bring our attention right back to our breathing.
Sometimes if we're able to concentrate solely on our breathing and not identify with the ego, we can receive a message, a symbol, or an image from our higher self. That's the essence, the small child trying to speak to us. If we have a challenge or an obstacle or a problem in our life we need to solve, doing a simple meditation and not identifying with the ego oftentimes will allow us to see a new perspective, perhaps even a solution to the problem. The key is learning to quiet the mind. It's a process of tug of war. If we are persistent, we always win. Fighting to stay in the present moment, using our breathing to hold us in the eternal instant. Being conscious of every drop of air we inhale and exhale. Normally throughout the day, breathing is an entirely unconscious action. We're completely reversing that right now. Breathing consciously with awareness. The longer we do this, the more the ego fights, the more vivid the images become, the deeper the memories go, as the ego fights for our attention. We don't identify with them, we let them drift by like cars on the road or clouds in the sky. Now direct our attention back to our physical body, becoming aware of the room that we're in, the people around us. Open our eyes and begin